We're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Q&A session with Dr. Rachel Graham and MarAlliance. My name is Joyce Wang, and I am the Director of Conservation Partnerships here at WCN, and I'll be moderating your Q&A today. This is your chance to get to know Rachel and learn about her work. You can participate directly and join Rachel and I live on screen to ask questions. Just click the orange permission and join request button at the top right if you'd like to join us live on camera. If you don't want to ask your question live, feel free to type it into the chat and we will also ask her your questions for you. We will try to get to as many questions as we can today. One other tip, you can make Rachel's video larger by double clicking on her image. So otherwise, sit back and enjoy the conversation. So by way of introduction, Dr. Rachel Graham has been referred to by the New York Times as the aquatic Jane Goodall. Rachel grew up in Tunisia and has lived in a range of countries throughout Africa and Latin America, and was fascinated by the sea from an early age. Even as a child, she was already a champion of less charismatic species, often bringing home snakes and even the occasional scorpion. Rachel's passion for research and the environment led her to pursue a degree in zoology at Oxford, and while mostly in the field, a master's from the University of Edinburgh and a PhD on whale sharks and fish spawning aggregations from the University of York. For the past 30 years, she has worked with the private sector, the UN, the Smithsonian, and the Wildlife Conservation Society on the conservation of big fish and their habitats, and for two decades lived in Belize working with fishers to identify threats and conservation opportunities for threatened marine wildlife. In 2011, Rachel won the prestigious Whitley Award for her community-based work on sharks in Mesoamerica, and in 2014, she founded MarAlliance, an international NGO with operations in several countries across Latin America and Africa. MarAlliance protects marine wildlife, notably sharks and rays, from harmful human threats to their ocean habitat. MarAlliance primarily operates in Central America and the Caribbean, but their research and their reach extends all the way to Micronesia and the shores of Africa. MarAlliance supports the science-based formation and management of marine protected areas, creates networks of scientists and local fishers, and guides the development of economic alternatives and adoption of sustainable practices for coastal communities. Outreach with local governments and schools is also a part of MarAlliance's quest to make marine knowledge accessible. Rachel is an active member of the IUCN Shark Specialist Group and has helped establish several national shark advisory committees around the world. When she's not busy saving sharks, Rachel is busy raising and feeding 2 teenage boys in Panama who are avid naturalists. So thank you, Rachel, so much for joining us today. We are so honored to have you with us. And I'll give you a minute to say hello while I let in our first guest and take our first questions. And before that, while you say hello, we have a lot of folks here today who are totally new to WCN and to MarAlliance. So could you give us a few minutes overview of MarAlliance and what you're doing to help sharks and rays?
Absolutely, Joyce. That was a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. And hello, everybody. It's just lovely to see you here. Thank you for coming and spending a little bit of time in the marine sector as well. This WCN forum has been absolutely fantastic. And so I want to tell you a little bit more about marine side of things. And, you know, before I move on into exactly what it is that we do, I just want to give a big shout out to my amazing team who are currently sitting in Belize, in Honduras, Panama, Cape Verde, and the United States as well, and to my fabulous board of directors, you know, without whom we wouldn't be able to do this amazing work of protecting sharks and rays, especially. So what exactly is it that we're doing? Well, we're working with coastal communities and traditional fishers to try and improve the prospects or secure a future for a host of mainly tropical coastal species of marine megafauna. When we say marine megafauna, they tend to be species that are larger than 50 centimeters or a meter when they're adult size, and notably sharks, rays, big finfish, your snappers and groupers, for example, and turtles as well. And why them? Because they share similar life history characteristics. They take a long time to grow big, and they are very vulnerable to fishing pressures. They tend to have few young as well. So those are kind of the focus of our work with coastal communities, with marine megafauna. And we are working in several countries in the tropics. I I mentioned Belize, Honduras, Panama, and Cape Verde, where we have bases at the moment, but we have projects in a few other countries where we work with various partners. And I think, you know, one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing with this particular pandemic is that it's hit the coastal communities we work with really hard. Our team so far seems to be in good shape and in good spirits, and we'll talk a little bit about what's going on there, but the coastal communities we work with, especially the traditional fishery sector, has been hit very, very hard. They often don't have another alternative, or even their alternatives such as tourism has been hit very hard by not only a lack of travel and international tourism, but also because there is a massive reduction in the demand for fish, an inability to go out and fish. There are a lot of laws that are actually stopping fishers from going out and fishing. And you may have seen in the news that prices for gas have gone down, but that has not necessarily helped many of the fishers who still have to pay a high price to go out and actually catch their fish. So many of these guys, and they're mostly men, although we do work with a few women in the sector, are being hit extraordinarily hard by the loss of income from fisheries, local, and also tourism.
Thanks, Rachel. So we've got a question from Don Kendall. He says, hi, Rachel, what are MarAlliance's biggest challenges today?
Thank you, Don. So I think some of our biggest challenges, well, first and foremost, I can't sugarcoat it. It tends to be funding. Funding is what makes everything happen, from our work with coastal communities in developing the economic alternatives with fishers, to actually conducting the monitoring and the monitoring itself of this marine megafauna to see how they're doing. And this is going to be critical, actually, especially after the pandemic restrictions are relaxed. We want to see, how is the sea doing? How are these species doing? Well, that all requires funding. And this monitoring also serves as an amazing economic alternative for these traditional fishers. So I'd say that that's first and foremost. I think we're also very worried about the fact that we're going to see a doubling of fishing effort when the pandemic relaxes, and even though we might be seeing fish coming back at the moment, and we've got this is a reproductive period for a lot of the species that we study. A lot of them are pupping or spawning at the moment. I think we might end up seeing a double whammy down the road. So I think one of the biggest challenges will be trying to make sure we can put into place some additional economic alternatives, work with communities to reduce those threats to those species, and help the communities, very importantly, help the communities become much more resilient to these kinds of economic challenges and hiccups. I think that's going to be absolutely critical, because that a pandemic happen like this, we're quite sure.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, Damien. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me here.
Hello, Damien.
So, Rachel, I did have 2 questions for you.
Sure.
So I know you saw my question about earlier. I did tell you how I am planning to become a future marine biologist and study sharks as you do and help in the conservation efforts. And I was hoping you could kind of answer my earlier question on how is it that younger future marine biologists like myself could kind of that you do and kind of help our own impact right now.
Oh, that's wonderful. There's so many ways that you can help. Well, one of the first things that you can do is, if you haven't done it already, volunteer with folks who work with sharks. That's really a great first step. You can gain some knowledge on the ground, get yourself out into the field, learn as much as you can about the species that you're very interested in, and then also sharpen a lot of skills. So some of the skills that we're looking for, and we do get asked this, if we can't take people out into the field, because we mainly try and bring in local students, local fishers and such, we ask people to develop some critical skills like geographic information systems, graphic design. Are you a good photographer or videographer? Can you sharpen those skills? Can you write really well? Are you a good teacher? Can you convey new skills? Teaching leadership, teaching skills that might be very helpful in terms of economic diversification, from construction to refrigeration. I mean, it's remarkable how broad the skill set can be that we can match with some of the communities we are working with. And that can be a really nice entree into the world of working with sharks and shark conservation.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you so much, Damien, for joining us.
Thank you.
Rachel, we've got a few more questions from the chat that are related. One from Sandeep Day, who asks, which species of sharks have the most stable populations and which species are struggling the most? And a second question from Elizabeth Potter, who asks, do you guys do much work with the ray and shark population in Polynesia?
Okay, thank you. So I think to answer the first question, so I think the species that are probably less at risk are the species that are going to be able to reproduce very quickly, are going to have quite a few young. Just to give you an idea, some of those species might be along the lines of the sharp-nosed sharks, very fast reproducing. They tend to be coastal sharks, and so they can rebound from exploitation more readily. The larger bodied sharks, such as hammerheads, bulls, silky sharks, the larger reef sharks, they're going to take a lot longer to actually reach maturity and to be able to withstand impacts from fisheries. So those, and especially let's take a look at hammerheads, recently elevated to critically endangered because by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, primarily because their numbers have dropped to over by over 90% since recording of their populations have been taking place. So I would say that we really need to focus a lot of our efforts on trying to minimize impacts to those species. And that is really actually a key focus of MarAlliance, is working with those threatened species. We're not against shark fisheries per se, we're just not. We work with coastal communities. We realize that these are species that form part of fisheries in general. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to reduce the use of the use of gears, fishing gears such as nets that actually catch absolutely everything. So we're being a little bit more selective in what we catch, when we catch them, and how we catch them.
Thanks, Rachel.
And what was the second question, Joyce?
The second question was whether you do any work with the ray and shark population in Polynesia.
Oh, so unfortunately not. No, the closest we've been is working in Ponape, working with sharks and manta rays in Ponape.
Super, thanks, Rachel. Hi, Linda, thanks for joining us.
Hi, guys.
Hello, Linda.
Listen,
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm totally enjoying this day. This is a marvelous effort that the WCN's putting on. Before we got started this morning, I was going through some of the different partners in the expo box here to the left of the screen, and yours was one that I watched years before we even got started. But what really terrified me, well, yeah, I'm very empathetic apparently, and when you start crying, I start crying. What can I say? So I saw you in basically what amounts to a rowboat out in the Atlantic. I mean, that little boat you use is terrifying. Speaking as someone who, for some reason, is afraid of water. Because of the whole issue of funding drying up, that I think everybody, which I fear is going to be a problem for everybody. Yes, you obviously need a new boat, a much larger boat, but where do you think you're going to be focusing your funding when we can finally start getting out and interacting again? Because there just seem to be so many different needs in different directions, and how much would a new boat cost?
Linda, thank you so much for that. And again, I'm sorry I reduced you to tears. I really didn't mean to do that. But you know, sometimes it's overwhelming.
It is.
Really is.
It is.
And some of the challenges can be so overwhelming. So let me start with some of the conversations that I've had with our community fishers. They are desperate to try and diversify. And they want to become more resilient because they recognize that this has really shaken them up. They've had periods where tourism has gone lower, their fishing hasn't been as good, but nothing that has been this catastrophic. So they've actually reached out and they've said, and we reached out to them too because we were trying to do a needs assessment, and they want to diversify their skill set. They want to be able to find a way to invest. I was just talking to one, for example, one of our core fishers in Mexico who said, thank goodness I just built an added on room to my house so that I could rent it out and somehow I'm surviving because everything else is shut down. So I think training them in income diversification activities will be one of the first things that we do with any funding that we get. We've had a lot of requests also from women who really want to get much more active into the sector. So we're completely excited about that. We intend to start up with the monitoring as well, because this is an incredible opportunity to see what happens when all the fishing stops. What happens to the sea? Yeah. And so we have this incredible opportunity to actually measure that and do that with the communities, do that with the fishers, because they themselves have come back to us and said, the silver lining we see with all of this is the fact that we're giving the sea an ability to breathe. Right. And so they recognize that. They recognize that their pressure is hurting the sea, but they have no other alternatives. Right. So increasing the resilience, diversifying their skill set and their ability to make income. And then as far as the boat is concerned, yes, Stephanie is Zé Luis Montero's boat over in Cape Verde, and we hire him and his boat and various other fishers in Boavista, Cape Verde, which I really implore you to go and visit, along with many other of our sites too, because just incredible sites, and that helps put money back into the community when of course we can travel. But the small boat is very, very small indeed. And some of the sharks that we get are very, very large indeed. And so it's very tippy. So a new boat would probably cost us about, well, we've determined it's about $48,000. And we were supposed to get something that is stable, that has 2 engines on the back, because we're in the middle of the Atlantic. You lose an engine, that's it. Right. So you really want 2 engines, and preferably you'd like to get to some of these sites a little faster than 4 hours. AKA, it would be nice to get to a site in about half an hour or an hour. So, because right now 4 hours is pretty much what it takes us when we have to get out to a key shark monitoring site.
Well, 15 horsepower little putt-putt is, I'm amazed you can get there in 4 hours. Just keep oars handy.
We start very early in the morning. That's for sure. We come back late. So yes.
Thank you so much for that, Rachel, and thank you, Linda, for joining us.
Thanks, Linda.
Rachel, we've got some great questions coming through the chat. One from Kenzie Moore. What do you find is the most effective way to help inspire people to care for sharks, especially for folks who don't often have access to coastlines? I primarily work out of an aquarium, and this is an issue that comes up quite regularly.
That's super, and we love to work with aquariums. So we've been partnering with, for example, the Pointe-à-Pitre Seward Aquarium as well, and I've had the opportunity to visit so many others, Monterey and National Aquarium and New England Aquarium, and I just want to send out my heartfelt feelings that I know times are very hard for living institutions right now, so zoos and aquaria. So how can you inspire people? We've been working a lot actually with virtual reality headsets and with live presentations. that's a really good start to get people kind of feeling like they're swimming with a shark. I've been working with Steve Mandel from Oceans 360 and Rick Miskiv from 22 Degrees and the rest of our team in MarAlliance to create some of these virtual reality videos. And literally what has come out of people's mouths has been mind is blown. Mind is blown. So you're already seeing kind of shifts in how people perceive these animals just from that virtual reality. So I would say that that would be a key activity to look at. Live presentations with people, engage them in the field as well. And I know that we also have a wonderful illustrator here. I think he might be in the chat. He was in the chat earlier, but Julius Sotoniai, who actually does Draw with Sharks through webinars, and we're going to be working together the second half of May. So plug into our webinar when we run that in the second half of May. And let's have a side conversation. I've got a lot of ideas on how you can really get people excited about sharks, even if they're not going to be able to see them.
Super, thanks, Rachel. And that's a great point. We will post MarAlliance's contact information and website in the chat. So you are all welcome to follow up with us or with Rachel, and we will connect you directly to her if you have any other questions for her. Deb, welcome to our Q&A. Great to see you.
How are you, Rachel?
Hello, Deb.
How you doing? Good.
How are you?
The most important question. How's Nosy?
So for folks who don't know, Deb has been following a personal post that I made on Facebook because I can't get out to the sea. So I took to recording the wildlife in my neighborhood and then in my yard. And Nosy is a tamandua, an anteater that has made a regular appearance. And actually his name is Antoine, but Deb has decided that his name should be Nosy.
That's it.
So he's doing apparently well, but he's not showing up very frequently at the moment.
But my question is this: with the virus going on and China, for the time being, damping down the wild animal trade, how about shark fin soup? Are they doing anything? Have they addressed that at all?
That's an excellent question. So there's a couple of things that are going on right now. So the shark fin trade tends to come from medium size. So sharks are finned from medium size to large size vessels plying either the coast or in international seas. What we've seen is pretty much impounding of boats. So there's not as much fishing effort as there was before. There's also a relaxation in trade and movement, obviously, of fins across borders. They used to go via flight, they used to go via shipping. All that's pretty much been stopped. However, there is still fishing occurring on the high seas. And what they're doing is they're transshipping some of those shark products. So some of the effort is still continuing. So it hasn't stopped, but it has definitely declined dramatically. The other aspect, and soon everybody's freezers will be full. They won't have anywhere to put anything. It's kind of like the situation with oil, you know, it's exactly the same situation. They will not, if they're going to run out of freezer space as well. The thing that concerns me a little bit is in trying to close down all the terrestrial markets for wildlife, there might be actually a greater run on marine wildlife. And that does concern me because it might be seen as COVID-free, or in some cases, there's actually been anecdotal reports that they're going after some dolphins now over in the Western Pacific because they think that that might be a good cure for COVID-19. So that's where my worry lies at the moment. But there's one other aspect, just to go back to shark finning. People just don't have the money either in order to buy shark fin soup, which is a very high-priced item. And what you're seeing is a drop in demand in general in seafood products. And so this is really giving sharks and fish and a whole host of other marine wildlife a real boom.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, Deb, for joining us. Rachel, we've got another question from the chat from Priya T, who asks, do you supplement fisher community tribal knowledge with science? In India, this is very important. How do you convince the scientists that this is the optimal path forward to ocean conservation?
I love that question. And in fact, I started in this world in working with fish and sharks 22 years ago, starting with a big project that was inspired by the late Bob Johannes, who talked a lot about traditional knowledge, especially in fisheries, and produced a series of 3 books called Voice of the Fisherman. And it was all based on the traditional fisher knowledge. And in fact, that's what has guided all of my work and all of our team's work. It's what are people seeing in the communities, what are fishers seeing, what are the key needs that they have in terms of information and data. And we absolutely marry the traditional knowledge with the science. And it's great because it means that it's a much more equitable partnership. We're really interested in making sure that this is a horizontal partnership and not what has traditionally been a north-south partnership. And in fact, it's not even a partnership a lot of the time between scientists and people in communities where the scientists are studying. So we're really trying to raise all of those boundaries, and that's why we consider the traditional fishers as very much part of our team.
Thanks, Rachel. Another great question from Stephanie Butera. Can you please tell us a bit about the role of GIS and MarAlliance's current research and how you would like to use it in future studies?
Oh, lovely, Stephanie. Well, I can direct you immediately, for example, to our Facebook page where we currently we're doing a little bit of armchair science. I had just tagged a couple of whale sharks a few weeks ago before lockdown occurred here in Panama. And we're getting to track them every single day. And then thanks to the wonderful mapping abilities of our team member, Francesco Garzon, who's now sitting in Cape Verde, use of Mapbox and QGIS and then just nice graphics and everything, we've got these beautiful maps so that people can be inspired by where these animals are going. And it's pretty exciting actually, because it's the first time that it's been recorded that these whale sharks are actually moving out of Panamanian waters into Colombian waters. So we've got Panamanians and Colombians really excited. And this is the power of mapping. And I see that if we can produce more exciting maps as we go along so people can visualize where these animals are moving, what the overlap is with threats. So for example, with Francesco as well, we're looking at the overlap of fisheries and manta rays, for example, in the eastern tropical Atlantic. We are also looking at, with Ivy Bermo, who's sitting up in the Bay Islands in Honduras, we're looking at what the movement of different acoustically tagged sharks are doing in the Lighthouse Reef Atoll in Belize. And remarkably enough, she has uncovered these amazing networks. The paper's going in, by the way, this weekend, Ivy, this weekend. Amazing networks of shark movement around the atoll, and where some are avoiding being with other sharks and some are hanging out with others. So a true social network, almost like Facebook. So these are the things that can be teased out by really beautiful mapping. And any ideas that you have for us to improve our mapping, we welcome them all, but we definitely see this as a expanding part of MarAlliance's education, outreach, and engagement with people, because you can always, and I do have to tell you, it's through mapping that we also got really excited folks in Brazil and Cape Verde and around the world. We had a tiger shark that we tagged with a fin-mounted satellite tag in Cape Verde that traveled, it was female, traveled all the way to Brazil, decided she wanted a few caipirinhas, and then she decided that maybe she prefers the waters and the tranquility of Cape Verde and went all the way back to Cape Verde. We wouldn't have known that without satellite taggings, and we wouldn't have been able to visualize it and share that with so many people if we didn't have the mapping capabilities that we have. And so really a big shout out also to Francesco, because he is making a lot of these beautiful maps at the moment.
Thank you so much, Rachel. We have time for a few more questions. We've got a question from Lilia, who asks, is fear and misunderstanding of sharks as a deadly man-eater the biggest threat to sharks?
Thank you. So we've done public perception surveys in a range of countries, Belize, Honduras, and then Guatemala as well. And then anecdotally with a lot of people in Mexico, Cuba, Panama, Micronesia and such. And what we're finding is that people still fear sharks. We were finding around a 50% mark of people kind of fearing sharks, but really that wasn't a main driver for them. It was over 80-85% of people still felt like they absolutely needed to be protected. So the need for protection is overriding any fears that people might have. And I think that through these abilities to go and swim with sharks or see them in the wild or experience them through virtual reality headsets and all that is bit by bit diminishing that fear. Frankly, the biggest impact to sharks is from fishing. You lower fishing, more sharks will thrive. And sharks, by the way, generally speaking, they're really not interested in human beings. They just want to eat fish.
Thanks, Rachel. Another question from Elizabeth Votter. Do you think that rays need more attention than they're getting, and what can we do to divert more attention towards them?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question, Elizabeth. I love rays. They give us such a ray of hope. Sorry. Yes, rays deserve a ton of attention. Maybe some of you have heard that there are all these shark sanctuaries that have been declared in different parts of the world. Well, several of them don't even include rays. And rays, the kind of what we call flat sharks or pancake sharks or magical sea flaps in some cases, have very similar life histories and sometimes even more vulnerable life histories than sharks. So they live a long time, they have very few young. Manta ray might only have one young once a year or once every few years after a gestation period of like a year. So we are trying, for example, in Honduras, we highlighted the fact that rays are increasingly being fished because they're running out of sharks, even though it's a shark sanctuary. And so one of the things that we're looking at is how can we work with communities to reduce fishing impact on rays, and how can we get rays into that same legislation that previously protected sharks. You see in terms of the number of studies, very few studies on rays compared to sharks. So we have a great opportunity, especially in the tropics, to augment our knowledge, to look very closely at some of the fisheries. We're doing a lot of that work, for example, in Panama at the moment, looking at fisheries landings, especially with rays, and seeing if we can put more protective measures in for rays, especially because they're coastal species. So there's a really strong overlap with a whole host of different types of fishing gears and, of course, coastal communities.
Thanks, Rachel. And this question is related to your earlier comment about the legislation around protecting sharks. Can you comment, question from Diana Vasquez, what is being done to stop the culture of cutting off the fins of sharks and leaving them for dead?
Thank you. So there's been a lot of push in numerous regional fishing management authorities to, for example, get people or get fishers to actually land the shark whole. So one of the big things is, as I mentioned, we're not against shark fishing, but what we are against is when you cut all the fins off and you release the body, often live, back into the sea. And it's mainly because the fins are worth much more than the meat. So how do you reverse that? You absolutely demand that all sharks are landed whole. And then that way, you don't have this horrible wasteful practice. It still has not been adopted by a range of countries and several regions, but we're all working towards trying to get folks to land them with fins attached and whole. So it's a constant struggle.
Thanks, Rachel. A great question.
And I just want to add one more thing, which is, generally speaking, in small coastal fisheries and with the fishers we have the opportunity to work with, they don't fin. They utilize the entire animal, and you know that's so much better. There's no waste, and so they have fillet. They have oil from the liver and such. So.
Thank you for that perspective. I don't think that's very widely known. Thanks, Rachel. A great question from Damien, and I think this relates to your earlier point about people not being able to experience sharks. So do you feel as if when people go diving with sharks in cages, does it disrupt their behavior, causing them not to have any natural hunting behavior? And I would add kind of a follow-on question: how do you promote people's kind of interaction with the sharks in a healthy way and get them to empathize and experience these animals and build empathy?
Those are all really, really good questions. And I want to say at the outset that I used to be on the side of the fence of I really didn't believe in kind of this fed shark tourism, etc. before, but really now with such dramatic losses for so many shark species and populations, I would rather a shark be fed than dead, because that is really the reality in many tropical countries. And these tropical coastal communities, they need to survive. So I do like shark tourism. I prefer it be unfed, but if it has to be fed, one of the things that I do encourage is the decoupling of kind of feeding by hand to sharks, because then they become a lot more emboldened. We've seen that firsthand. For example, I'll give you an example in Honduras and Belize, with people spearing the invasive lionfish and then feeding it to sharks, and then sharks that would start seeing people going down with GoPro sticks and various things like that. They all of a sudden thought, oh, you're going to go and get me a little snack. This is great. And that can make some people uncomfortable, even though they're not at all interested in them. So I would say decoupling the kind of feeding by hand. You really want to make sure that you are far away from whatever the food is being given. You're seeing increasingly a lot of tour operators trying to have some very key guidelines as to how to conduct their operations. Cage diving, one of the issues that I see is only when people are throwing out some of the chum or the head of the tuna, then dragging it to the cage so that the animal, usually a great white, actually bites the cage, and this is not good for them. So I would like to see a modification in that, and really not going down that route. And I will finally say that one of the key aggregations that we have worked a lot with, because it generates many millions of dollars, at least a minimum of $5 million a year, is the Whole Chan Marine Reserve Shark and Ray Alley in Belize. And that is where nurse sharks and rays come, and it's been a fabulous way of introducing so many people, not only in Belize, but internationally, to sharks and rays in a very docile way. Fabulous. People were very worried, what's going to happen with this pandemic? What are the sharks going to do if they've been fed and now they're not showing up and people aren't showing up to feed them anymore? Well, guess what? They just go back to their normal selves, because I've been talking to some of the rangers and biologists there. Kira Foreman from Whole Chan Marine Reserve has been telling me that the sharks just go somewhere else, the rays go somewhere else, and when the tour guides or the rangers come back with sardines, and they come back as well. So I think we're going to see a resumption of those activities when restrictions are dampened from this pandemic, and I do hope that everybody listening who has the opportunity to travel to some of these sites will do so, because it's a great way to put money back into local communities and to show the actual economic value of these sharks live.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So for our very last question, before you sign off, can you tell people why you have hope for sharks and rays?
Oh, so much hope. I think because the fishers, the communities we've worked with, the students, all in the countries where we're working with, they want to see these animals survive. They recognize their intrinsic value. They're excited by them. There's a huge amount of pride. In many cases, they see their economic value live. And what I'm getting as a feedback from people at the moment during this very challenging period is that they realize that we need to alter our relationship with nature. We need to, even if we're dependent on it, like we're a fisherman, we need to alter that relationship. That is coming from them directly. It gives me massive hope. And so what we need is we need your support to help us support them in making some of those changes and reduce the pressures on sharks, rays, fish, and moreover. And I can ask you also, please reduce your consumption of marine wildlife, be it fish, be it shark, be it even shrimp, etc. Please reduce, because that means that you will be helping us towards a solution for our overfished seas.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and for the good reminder that everybody can make a difference in their daily choices to help wildlife. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing with us about your life's work and about MarAlliance's fantastic work. So we will now be heading into a 5-minute break, and if you all would like to join us on the main stage for the Spectacle Bear presentation at the top of the hour, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us.
And I want to say thank you very much to you, Joyce. Thank you to WCN for putting on this amazing expo. And I just want to say thank you so much to all of our supporters, all the folks who joined us today. We couldn't do this without you. And please know that we have an incredible team. Please reach out to us outside of WCN. And let's keep this conversation going, because everybody can be a marine wildlife champion, absolutely. So thank you, WCN. This has been an amazing experience.
Thanks, Rachel.